Eccoci.
Hello. At last, we've reached this special moment of the 31st of May, and I'd like to greet each one of you. But first of all, you need to check and make sure you're linked in for the translation of the language you want, also the Italians. So on the bar at the bottom, you'll see this picture of the world where it says interpretation. So each one can choose their language. But now I'll explain this in Spanish. I live in Barcelona, although at the moment I'm connected from Madrid with a group from Spain who've gathered together for this moment, together with Ferdinando, who's connected from Turin in Italy. We want to say welcome to everyone on behalf of the Center for Dialogue with People of No Religious Affiliation. We can say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because we know that for this worldwide Zoom, we're connected from many parts of the world in different time zones. Before we hand over to the moderator and the speakers who will be accompanying us at this event, we'd like to briefly introduce today's program and the context in which it was created. It's the experience of dialogue between people of different faiths and beliefs, both religious and non-religious, from the Focolare movement. The Focolare is a large and diverse family, a new people born of the gospel, as its foundress Chiara Lubich defined it when she started the movement in 1943 in Trenton, Italy, during the Second World War, to provide spiritual and social renewal. Today, the movement is present in 182 countries and has thousands of members who follow its teachings and way of life. Its aim is to contribute to the building of a more united world, respecting and promoting diversity. And to achieve this goal, it works at dialogue at every level. It's a constant effort to build bridges and fraternal relations between people, cities, and cultural spheres. Although the movement was born in the heart of the Catholic Church, it's open to Christians of different denominations, to believers of other religions, and to people with no religious affiliation, but who share its spirit and goals, while remaining faithful to their conscience and their own identity. At the end of the 1970s, with the expansion of the movement, openness towards people without a religious affiliation, such as agnostics, people indifferent to religion, atheists, it developed to the point of giving rise to a dialogue with its own physiognomy, since unity means profound respect for individuals, for their dignity, for their identity, their culture, their needs, and their beliefs. In this context, in 1978, the International Center for Dialogue with People of No Religious Affiliation was founded, and it's promoted many international congresses and meetings with the aim of building universal fraternity together. Ferdinando will tell us something more now.
Yes, for many years now, there are groups all over the world who are meeting regularly, both locally and internationally. Some of these meetings have also seen the direct participation of Chiara Lubich, who wanted to meet friends without religious affiliation from the Focolare movement and answering their questions and dialoguing about fraternity. For example, peace has always been one of the major topics of this dialogue. In 2004, This was the topic that brought us together at Castel Gandolfo in a large 3-day conference. And the message of Chiara Lubich also accompanied everyone who was at that meeting. Together, we discovered the spirituality of unity can deeply renew every person, believer or not, in every situation, in all different environments. The movement is committed to fraternity and peace in various areas, and Chiara's legacy continues even today to inspire people and realities that want to be living in society. Another example, the 3 webinars that were very well attended in Italy in the spring of 2023 to give a voice that went against the current to the commitment to peace. And the mass media were involved in all of this. And we recall that they were strongly desired by Luciana Scalacci, known to many of us, who died a few months ago, bearing witness to her choice to live for dialogue until the end. In the current dramatic, tragic context of our world, wounded by wars and division, we feel that we can be seeds of hope, starting with us being little peacemakers around us. The topic chosen for this panel discussion, forgiveness and peace, wants to be a tangible step in this direction. A webinar that brings us together from all over the world, but also a real and personal commitment. Many of the people connected receive the idea of the month, which by coincidence in the month of June, starting tomorrow, offers us a daily challenge. What can I do? You will find it on our website, and you can find other things also on this dialogue on the website, dialogueforunity.focolare.org. Thank you for your presence, which will surely enrich this moment. And we now pass over to Pilar, who will tell us how this panel discussion will proceed. So wishing you all a good meeting. So thank you, Maria Angeles and Ferdinando. I will speak in Italian, so it will be easier for those who are translating. And I'll explain a bit of the people who we're going to be speaking with today. And so in this moment, forgiveness and peace. So the courage of difficult choices. So with us here, we have Rodrigo Mandrones, who is political science professor. He's a professor of the Institute of Political Sciences in Chile, in a Catholic university, and in research in violence and democracy. He has a degree in history in the same university, even a master's degree, and he has a doctorate in political sciences in the New York University. He has taught, he does research and publications on public politics and even on citizenship. And he has developed research which was really productive in the theme of fraternity, political fraternity and democracy and citizenship. And we also have with us Manolo Garcia, who is an expert historian from Spain, and he comes from Jaén in Spain, and he studied in geography in Granada. And he was a teacher at high school until 2009. And he's an author of various research on the Spanish Civil War, and he was part of the educational projects in the European Union on multiculturality, and he has been nominated the Academy of Sciences and Letters in Cordoba. And we also have Cristina Ala, who she's here to tell us her experience. And she is here to tell us a story, the story of resilience, but also I will say something about her that is personal but professional. And she was born in a town near Turin in the northern Italy. In a moment of her life, she got to know Chiara Lubich, and her horizons were broadened towards a united world. She did various jobs, and her story is very interesting, trying to find her professional way. And then after different situations, she started studying medicine, but with a lot of difficulties. And then around her in her community, she got her degree, and she got a job at the Department of Orthopedics in a small town near Turin, and she's specializing in hand surgery, and she's been working there, has worked there until her retirement. And she's married with Lucio for 41 years, and she's the mother of two grown-up and independent children, Giovanni and Mariana. And so I will briefly tell you how we're going to do this panel discussion, this dialogue, just in 10 minutes each, really concentrated to tell us something that is really motivated and will help us to have, perhaps it will arise some questions in us. But if you have some questions, in the moments where we will have questions and answer, we won't have an open microphone, but we want to have this an hour and a half, and we want to look at the timings of everything. So each speaker will have 10 minutes, and you can write the questions whenever you want. You can write them on the chat. If you don't want to be recorded, please switch off your camera. We are recording at the moment. And so you can write on the chat any questions in Italian, in English, in Spanish, and not in any other language. So to make it easier for us to answer, if you have another language, we ask you please to use one of the Google Translate or something and then put it on the chat. I think I have said everything that will allow us now to start. Just to say that there will be a moment after these three speakers. They will ask each other questions, and then after that we will have a plenary session with the questions from everyone. So we'll start with historical perspective, and so we will ask Manolo to start. So hello, Manolo. So you have 10 minutes, and I'll let you know when 2 minutes, you've got 2 minutes left.
De acuerdo. Buenas tardes. Un cordial y doble
Good afternoon, everyone.
España. Gracias por la presentación.
A special greeting to you all from Cordova. Thank you also for the invitation to come here, because it's a great pleasure for me to participate in this. In remote prehistory, since the beginning of humanity, human beings have alternated between periods of warlike conflict with all the barbarity they entail, and all the periods of peaceful existence. Peace and forgiveness, war and violence are a constant throughout history. The trials of Homo sapiens Cro-Magnon tribes clashed with the Neanderthals until their near extinction, but they also joined in sexual exchanges that gave rise to a new race, the Homo sapiens sapiens. Even later on, nations fought wars, but they also signed treaties and agreements, surrendered disputed territories, encouraged trade, tore down borders, and even sealed alliances through marriages between royal families, only to return again to clashes in new fights, which led to the building of symbolic walls, separating one from the other. The wall of ambition, the wall of the seizing of territories to build empires, the wall of world domination, of the control of natural resources, both sources of energy and raw materials, and the wall of the enslavement of human multitudes, an ancient scourge that's still not completely extinct, that regarded human beings as animals or talking machines. War became all-encompassing in the 20th century, with two world wars that involved all the continents and were fought on land, sea and air, with new weapons, submarines, tanks, aviation, chemical gases, etc., and with collateral damage that affected the world's population. The map of Europe has already burnt several times, and there was never enough human blood, however much was spilt, to put out the fires. Cruelty knew no bounds, as the genocide of 6 million Jews by the Nazis taught us at the Holocaust shower. But alongside this grim overview, there are also seeds of hope, such as the creation of the United Nations in 1945 to prevent a Third World War, even though it couldn't prevent numerous local conflicts like Korea, Vietnam, Palestine, Ukraine, Congo, Sudan, Yugoslavia. It's as if the world were a giant swamp and needed outlets in the form of local conflicts to release the enormous pressure of accumulated tensions. But human beings forgive and build, one step forward, even if they then take 2 steps back. Diseases are tackled. Dialogue is promoted even between people with very different convictions. Transnational organizations are created for social and economic development, and forgiveness is sought, as some metropolitan areas have done with their former colonies, for example, Belgium and Holland, or within the same country towards the abused indigenous people, as Australia has done with its own people. The arms race doesn't stop, and this war industry needs wars so that its products are used and new ones can be manufactured. Geopolitical conflicts and trade disputes become more heated, as we now see between the US and China, or rather between Trump and the rest of the world that doesn't bend to his whimsical will. Conflicts are endless. More than 80 years after the Spanish Civil War, there's still debate about a policy of reconciliation that overcomes oblivion and manages to heal wounds. There are wars that seem eternal, entrenched, and that seem to have no solution. They last forever. What happens in Ukraine, Palestine, or Congo didn't start yesterday, but has a long historical background. The Cold War in the post-war period between capitalism and communism, between the USSR and its Warsaw Pact satellites, with the US and its NATO allies, fortunately didn't result in an open war that would have involved the use of nuclear weapons and would have led to the end of the world. However, this eventuality came very close to being accomplished with the Cuban Missile Crisis in '63. Today, it's given way to a new, increasingly hotbed of unrest between the great powers. They're now limited to economics, but also with territorial threats. The US wants Greenland, Russia wants part of Ukraine, and China wants Taiwan and other Pacific islands. A phrase has become famous since ancient Rome. If you want peace, prepare for war. And this is what happens today in the European Union, when its leaders talk about increasing military spending and urge the civilian population to prepare for self-defense. Wars aren't just about bullets and weapons. What's happening with immigration from Africa to Europe or from Central America to North American giant is another form of war. There are those who now call for European Marines to stop the little boats at gunpoint. But once more, there's the possibility of forgiveness, as we've seen in Northern Ireland, when thanks to the Good Friday Agreement, Stormont 98, an attempt was made to put an end to the long conflict between those who favoured union with Great Britain and those who wanted a united Ireland. That the tension between Catholics and Protestants wasn't part of the agreement, but also religion has always been a factor of division. In the Basque Country, ETA renounces terrorism, even if it shows no repentance, and participates in the political game. There's a greater awareness of solidarity everywhere, a need for peace. Manuel Azaña, President of the Spanish Republic, asked in 1938 for peace, mercy, forgiveness.
Aunque nadie le hizo caso,
Although no one listened to him, I make these words my own, and I want to conclude this first talk with the dove that Picasso drew as a symbol of hope for world peace. This is how I include this first presentation, and I look forward to what you want to ask or talk about during the dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was very stimulating for all the people who are listening. And there'll be questions in the second part, so especially in the moment, social and political, how we met, and in this historical moment, and to open up questions. And it will be really interesting to listen to you and how we can contribute to peace and forgiveness. And who we have to forgive. And there's I'm sure, so many questions. Thank you very much. And now we will pass on to Rodrigo Mardrones, who's going to give us in the political science. So you have 10 minutes, and I'll tell you in 2 minutes. You have 10 minutes. So thank you very much, Pilar, for this presentation, and thank you very much to Maria Ángeles and Ferdinando for this invitation, the invitation to this meeting, to this webinar. And what I would like to propose today is the approach of what is the relationship between fraternity and reconciliation, or starting from the approach of human rights. So this builds a wound in human dignity and in the dignity of all people, that damage on people, so of their body and soul in some way is amplified through ignorance of circumstances and of injustice, and also because of the lack of what is the recognition of the people who are abused. There's a refusal of recognizing this, especially those who are who bring about these wounds, and it brings about also from society. And there's many contexts where in certain ways those who deeps into the wound, and in many cases, even in Latin American, we saw this damage against the person. And in some way, it is very strong. And this damage against the person, in reality, is the damage that comes back to the person who is losing through that wound. And to face these and human rights, there's a dominating that has to do with justice, and this emerges from liberalism, and implies rights and duties and affects the human rights. And it's important in the state of the rights and in juridical terms to find a solution. And so it's very important to give to those who lose through a wound what they are worth. And this paradigm of justice is great part of institutions all over the world through the United Nations and the global networks of the journalism. But in front of this paradigm of justice, liberal justice in the last times, what emerges is the idea of a justice, a restorative justice. And in this restorative justice, what we can say is in some way it's breaking the relationship between states and the victim and those who are violating this, not only violating law and jurisprudence, but it's in front of what is wrong and repairing the relationships and to repair that damage. And the punishment is not enough. And the repairing, and there's a process where you ask forgiveness, and it's
La reconciliación consiste precisamente
a
en la
reconciliation
restauración de las relaciones correctas. Es un
and the
concepto
reestablishment of
una
its
mejora de las relaciones,
improvement of relationships.
y ojo que muchas
And it's
veces
important to improve relationships, and many times
de las relaciones
is to repair is not understood well, because often even before the breaking up of relationships, those relationships were not right. So during the Civil War, there were human rights, but we have to ask ourselves,
antes de la guerra, pero podríamos pensar si esas
do we reestablish
eran las correctas.
how it was before the war? So we have to understand if those relationships were right before the war. And so the reconciliation is a concept of justice, and that ethics is considered those three religions as included. The three main religions that collaborate in this justice, and these religions, using in a certain way different approaches and different sources. For example, the gospel for the Catholics, they have reconciliation, but there's a secular source, which is this restorative justice. And in front of political injustice in one country or between countries, the ethics of reconciliation is a concept of justice, that to repair the right relationship between these four actors. The correct relationship is characterized by respect of human rights, to adhering to human rights, and the respect of for international law, respect for human rights, adhering to democracy, rule of law, respect for international law, ample recognition of the legitimacy of these values, and respect of the virtues that accompany these values. And among these virtues, there is mercy, which is not the ability to forgive in itself, but to share to find mercy in others, and it's a commitment that they bring, alleviate the pain and suffering caused by the breakdown of relationships. So this justice, this paradigm of justice, of the ethics of reconciliation, is not a concept of criticism, is not a concept that's given for politics, especially the inspiration of social harmony. It's something utopic, some idealistic, to say that reconciliation, in front of reconciliation, in some way, there is the dynamic of conflict, which contradicts that dynamic. There is scepticism, and yes, you have you look for the truth.
Cierta reciprocidad y confianza.
There are rights, and you accept a certain trust, and the liberalism would say that the forgiveness and if you could speak a bit slower.
Sí, me tomo de algunos elementos del Papa Francisco.
There are some elements in Pope Francis that are relevant, which I would like to that touch this topic, the common good, that is the respect of the human person, the common good that asks for peace, and the truth is inseparable from justice and mercy, and so it doesn't lead to impunity or revenge. And we mustn't forget, Pope Francis says, when we speak about the badness of people, memory is necessary for the future, speaking about justice and fraternity. And third element that indicate Pope Francis indicates, in front of oppression, we mustn't renounce to rights in front of those who degrade the human life. So you have to find opportune moments to take away from the offender what they are not, they don't know how to. So he writes from Fratelli to Tutti,
y exigir la reparación.
have to look after the human rights and repair. They have to demand to be repaired.
Para que la democracia perdure,
so the theme of fraternity is important. And so if democracy can last, we have to have strong, solid relationships, and fraternity is important, a virtue that evidently urges citizens to look after one another, but it's a virtue that from political institutions, that a restorative justice is at the basis of this.
además de la justicia restaurativa,
So besides restorative justice, what you need a social justice, the progress of democracy,
para que la sociedad
that has to be a minimum basis. So in equal opportunities. So Pope Francis embraces the human rights and peaceful justice and the freedom of men and women and the freedom of them in any form of exclusion.
Esa era la idea final.
That was the last idea.
Grazie. Grazie veramente.
Thank you very much. And so Rodrigo has opened up a door to think and to give a global glance. Before it was more historical. Now we're talking about memory and forgiveness, that it seems that they are opposite. But then afterwards we can ask you what you think about this. And then now we pass on to Cristina, who will tell us her experience in the context of what it means for her to speak about forgiveness and to speak about peace. So Cristina, you have 10 minutes and I'll tell you when you still have 2 minutes left.
Un saluto a tutti voi che siete in ascolto.
A special greeting to all of you who are linked also from countries far away.
Per motivi legati alla mia
So, because I get easily moved, I want to follow the text I prepared. In the second half of the last century, for more than 2 decades, starting from the late 1960s, Italy experienced a tragic period of political violence with massacres, bombers, assassinations, and injuries claimed by different acronyms that bloodied our cities, with the aim of destabilizing and overthrowing the constitutional order of the state.
La mia famiglia.
You can see us here in this photo of the time. We were a simple family. My dad, who initially was a factory worker, and then he became a supervisor in a vehicle parts factory for a large company in the neighboring village. My mum was a housewife, and she earned extra money with homemade knitting jobs. We were 3 daughters and we studied. Despite what I learned almost daily from the radio and the newspapers, I hadn't anticipated that terrorism could strike us too. On the evening of the 31st of January 1980, as I was packing my suitcase to go to a conference, the phone rang. It was my mother. She said to me in its distress, "There's been an attack on the factory where Dad works. They must have hit him, taken him to a hospital in Turin. Go and find out." But which hospital? I took a taxi to find out where my father had been taken. And in the meantime, I warned my friends with whom I was supposed to leave of what was happening to me. When I got to the second hospital, I found a lot of movement, an assembling of police. And I tell the policeman who stopped me who I am. I asked if they'd taken Carlo Alla, my dad, there. He looked at me. I don't think he knew what to say to me. With a nod, he let me go ahead. Behind a partition, there was a stretcher, a white sheet, a red stain. I understood that my father was dead. I uncovered the sheet to see his face. It was him. I recognized him. With a kiss, I told him, "I love you." In the meantime, the confusion around us increased, so I went out into the courtyard. It was cold, raining mixed with snow. Soon, I was joined there by my friends. Together, we remembered the word of life of that month that we'd agreed to live. It was, "Thy kingdom come." And together we asked that for Dad, may his kingdom come at once. With my mother and sisters, who'd arrived also at the hospital, we decided to go home. I was stunned by what had happened. During the night, I was overwhelmed with anguish. In my mind, an ever faster succession of flashbacks, moments of life with my father, peaceful moments, but also moments of conflict. In fact, I'd been a bit of a rebel. Memories that now hurt me deeply. Death had closed a chapter. I found myself powerless, unprepared. It was awful. A prayer came to my lips. "Jesus, you who know what it is to die, you've been there and can understand. Act as a bridge between Dad and me. Tell him so that he understands that I love him." In that anguish, it was like a door was opening. I found myself enveloped in a tunnel of peace, of light. I had the certainty that all my love for Dad went through there, and that when I returned, my father's love still reached me. Everything was clear now. I knew he understood me. No more explanations were needed because he knew. I don't know how much time went by. Then the pain returns. The sleepless nights return. In the morning, I needed support, comfort. I need to pray. I went to church. There was Mass. I found myself reciting the Our Father, and that the words, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us," that "as" questioned me. It nailed me down. I must forgive immediately. A big leap inside. I must remain within the logic of the gospel. My father on earth is no more. But then I would have got him back, and with him also the Father in heaven. Otherwise, I would have lost them both. With the family, in response to violent expressions of cursing that had appeared in the press, which we didn't feel were ours, we decided to write on the funeral announcements, which are customary to post in the village and neighboring villages. We wrote, "Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they're doing," a phrase Jesus said before he died. And this is what Carlo Alla taught us. And we put our names following this phrase. During the funeral ceremony with the community, we prayed for the person who did the shooting.
Negli anni
Over the years, I've experienced that forgiveness was first and foremost was a gift for me, one that restored my peace, my freedom. It was a gift for me. There were also moments that were not easy. I needed to understand how one can be killed in the name of an ideology just for being at work, in the wrong place, at the wrong time.
Nel momento sbagliato. Ho esigenza di condividere.
I've got a need to share, but I also feel a vivid responsibility to bear witness to a gift received, a gift not just for me. And this prevents, and it also clashes with personal shortcomings and shyness. There's a Jesuit, Father Adolf Bachelet, who's a brother of Vittorio, the vice president of the Italian judiciary, who was killed by the Red Brigades 12 days after my father. After meeting in prison with some members of the group responsible for the attack on my father, told us that after reading the funeral announcements in the streets of the village, they become self-critical and had decided to abandon their weapons. I'm grateful that I had people around me, and they were such a support for me. They didn't leave me alone. If in some people I found understanding, in other people I found only curiosity or indifference, if not maybe more negative feelings. But all this has helped me to understand and to welcome the experiences of others, making them my own, even if they are different, sometimes even contrasting, but always deserving of respect. Deep dialogues were established that over time became trust and friendship. I must also say that later, in other situations, forgiveness was a long and a troubled journey, and only when I gave in did peace return. Thank you.
Grazie, grazie. Grazie Cristina.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christina.
Penso che abbiamo lasciato a Cristina
I think we left Christina at the end
che sarebbe stato molto diverso quello
because it would have been very different what she would tell us for what was said before, but everything is very connected. You can see that there is this golden thread between this to see how life goes ahead, history, in humanity, the present story, and the past. What is justice? What is this peace if we look at it from the point of restorative justice? How do we move in front of a person who has done evil, an offender, and then what it means, the memory of not forgetting, but also to forgive. And then Christina was telling us her story with this beautiful summary that she does, this forgiveness that is a gift, and this has brought back peace and freedom for her. And if you have any questions, please write the questions on the chat, and the first people who ask question will be our three speakers. And so I would invite Manolo. Manolo, now we have 10 minutes between question and answers. So who is your question for Rodrigo or for Cristina?
La Cristina.
Puoi fare la domanda
Entiendo que
e
fueron las
Cristina-
Brigadas
sì.
Rojas los autores del atentado contra tu padre, ¿no?
The Red Brigades were the ones who were responsible, who were behind that attack. There have been other great happenings. There's been a lot of criticism. There have been political challenges. Among those people, has there been any closeness with the Red Brigade? Have any of them been looking for an element of forgiveness? Because this has all had an immediate effect. Also, ETA, it was violent, but it was aimed towards politics. If we think of ETA, there was a different process it followed. That in Spain, there were moments where ETA asked for forgiveness. But the Red Brigades, was there a drawing closer? Was there any forgiveness that was asked for there?
Il gruppo che è responsabile dell'attentato
The group who were responsible
non era le Brigate
for
Rosse.
my father, they weren't
Contro i comunisti territoriali.
the Red Brigade. It was a different group, a group that was following the same ideology,
Era in sviluppo, ecco. Quindi
but they were
doveva
developing
arrivare
still.
appunto
They
a
hadn't
livello
reached
anche,
the
notorietà
the level or the
delle Brigate
fame of the
Rosse.
Red
Quindi,
Brigade.
sono persone che
They were
poi a
people
seguito anche di questo incontro
who
che
then,
noi abbiamo avuto con padre
after this meeting that we had with the priest, we were able
venir loro in contatto.
to be in contact with them,
Nei primi tempi
a contact
e poi è venuta effettivamente da loro
that,
la richiesta di perdono.
but then they asked for forgiveness.
E comunque sono realtà che
But there,
si sentono profondamente.
these are realities that you feel very deeply in your soul, both those who undergo the offense, the crime, and also for those when they realize they've made a mistake. And I think it's not too easy to go back on your steps
maniera vincolano con altre persone.
because it also involves other people.
Poi il discorso non è
Then
più andato avanti
the conversation didn't go ahead
in tempi
except
abbastanza recenti.
more recently, 3 years ago, when one of them wrote to us
Se quello che noi avevamo dichiarato
asking if what we said at the beginning was still true.
Era stato un vissuto
And this was something that was lived,
per tutta la vita.
and it's something that they carried for the whole of their life because it had changed their life. And it had brought about a change in relationships. And he said,
Che nel frattempo si era costruita.
and we saw that in the meantime, a family had been built up by him.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for the question, Manolo. So we'll try to ask the questions a bit slower to help our translator. So Rodrigo,
La tua domanda.
that would be your question. Who would you like to ask the question to? You have 5 minutes between question and answer. Who would you like to? I would like to ask Manolo.
Manolo, en tu perspectiva,
Manolo, in your perspective, your historical perspective,
desde los orígenes de la humanidad, digamos,
from the beginning of humanity, more or less, there is a constant element that it's violence, war.
tú mismo señalabas dos
In some way, you individuated a step ahead, but you've also said something that there were processes of forgiveness, of peace in this history, but also a constant dynamic where there is a step ahead and 2 steps back.
es como un, si uno lo piensa al futuro,
If you think if you look at towards the future, you could say that this dynamic will continue, a dynamic in where we see a step ahead and two steps back constantly, and this way of violence war will never disappear.
Intuyo que la razón de esto es
And so I guess that the reason for all of this may be that in these moments of peace, in reality, we see moments of
un momento de una paz espuria, una paz que no resuelve
stopping. It's a ephemeris peace, which is a peace that does not repair, a peace that does not bring about justice, therefore. So how do you see this dynamic, thinking of the future? Will the history of things, will they continue to be like this? Will there be a different possibility? Or what is the way for the future? The way for the future in order to go towards a lasting peace? I ask in some way, what do you think?
Ti possiamo dare un premio.
A corto plazo no vislumbro una paz duradera y eterna, ¿no? Porque los conflictos siguen siendo
I can't foresee a peace that lasts because there are economic interests, territorial interests. Also, if we think of the arguments among different people, there's an interest also maintaining the resources of Africa. There's so many material resources that also are involved. Yes, this dynamic of one step forward and two back needs to change. Maybe we could say 2 steps forward and 1 back. But already we're talking about the Third World War. So it's difficult that this will reach an end quickly. We can see the dynamic here that's spreading. But I mean, we don't know what Russia's going to do with their nuclear arms. So we want to be optimists. And at least to look at the positive side, we've avoided a real Third World War. Very often, often we've got to recognize the fact that we are looking towards the future, but if we think of the situation with Palestine, there isn't a solution. There are many organizations, many groups are trying to do something, but it's very difficult. But there are so many basic problems there. So in the short term, I don't see peace arriving. Maybe in the longer term, yes.
So when they say that the Spanish speak very fast, I understand what it means, because there are complex ideas. I don't know if the translators had time, because now we just have 1 minute to reinforce. So should I summarize it? No. If you want to reinforce the main idea in 40 seconds, just to be.
I want to be an optimist. And this is the positive side.
I'm the first to speak very quickly, so I remember that we have to speak slowly. So now that we have listened to so now's the moment of Cristina. So who is your question for?
So I'll ask a question to Rodriguez.
Rodrigo, era questa.
This is my question. If we look today at the map of the world, which is full of conflicts, many of which are linked to the past, but through the media, they enter into our houses, they make us ask questions. But when we look at them, we don't know what to do when we see this. I think, what can I do? I ask, do you think it's possible that there could be reconciliation in this moment where we're living these things that seem to be impossible? What path should we follow today? Where should we begin?
Me parece que Manolo ha
I
dado
think
una
that
pista en eso, en el
so
sentido de
Manolo
que
has already given us some indications. He has really said to reinforce the theme of the
las dos, ¿no? Cuestiones que deben
Un-
ir de la mano.
United Nations. So there's two things that go ahead together. From one point of view, the reinforcing of the institutions, as I said, we have to generate institutions. We have to reinforce the rights, democracy, the institutions like the UN and local things and national things. But it's also necessary in this context,
O como parte de
as a movement, we can do this. And also as part of civil society, we can do this. To have a vision, religious is useful in this context. Also to have approach on existence, we have to go towards a culture. We have to reinforce a culture of peace. And this culture of peace must be a culture of peace that enters into the institutions. And there must be this reciprocal institutions, so there's two pillars. As a civil society, we have a function that of generating towards education and different volunteering works and different associations. We can generate a culture of peace. And this culture of peace must be reinforced through politics with institutions that sustain that culture of peace in a level, international level, local level. But there are other organizations that in some way can reinforce the culture of peace. This is what I would say. So thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Christina. Well, there are many questions. The questions are arriving. So we're going to have a brief summary just to help us to understand this glance that you have given now, then to open the microphone to the different questions. So if we take the idea of Manolo, he spoke to us from the beginning of history and these moments of war, that there's peace and war. But then he also said that life history, there was two steps ahead and one back, and here the importance of reinforcing the United Nations also because it was very important to block this idea of the Third World War. And he also spoke how the human person forgives and builds. And he spoke about that they need the war to make weapons, and then there was a just politics of reconciliations. And so he also said that all wars have a very long history, and this threat of war goes ahead with other topics like immigration, which is a new type of war, and then religion sometimes have validated exclusion. So the question from Rodrigo, if peace is only peace was just like a pause between the wars, he insisted, saying that the United Nations have an important role, and there you go, more ahead than back, because there's a great need for peace. And Rodrigo then was speaking about human rights, about wounds, about people who are abused or injustice and suffering. And this indifference and not recognizing and not wanting to see, but also the difficulty when the offender or an honorable person, and then there's the connection with Pope Francis, who suffers injustice, needs to repair. And so he was saying that evil is also hurting the offender, and there's the there's justice that's within a model of a liberal model, liberal justice, which is different to restorative justice. And he was speaking about this justice, this restorative justice that must go alongside law and the rights, and what is the model that is working up until now. But this connection is destroyed by the crime. And so justice in the end is restoring these relationships, which means three things: to recognize the damage, ask forgiveness, and he was saying, and eventually, it seems like that this is not sure, to be forgiven. And so speaking about ethics of reconciliation and justice, and to reinforce democracy and the state of rights and international law, and a culture of peace that is built from civil society to the institutions and politics and also locally. And then Christina was speaking to us about her experience of resilience and her deep story and her personal experience of her spirituality that allowed her to understand how death can close a chapter in life and generates a lot of impotence, powerlessness. And this is the journey that she took and made her decide to remain in the logic of the gospel, which is a way of life, and to live this within, which is forgiveness, which also as a gift, because it's brought peace and freedom in her. And she also says how this model helped the offenders to understand that they had made a mistake. And she also said that it was a long journey and really struggled. And she also never felt alone. She felt that this feeling that she was in a community helped her to go ahead. And so I'm sorry, they told me to make a summary. It's not that I wanted to do it, but I think and I hope Rodrigo, Manolo, Cristina, is something missing in the summary that I didn't, any idea that I missed out. Do you agree?
Yo
Sí.
estoy de acuerdo, sí.
Yes. Thank you.
Andiamo alla seconda parte.
So let's go now to the second part. The second part is a dialogue with everyone. So I'll ask some questions that have arrived.
Abbiamo adesso un momento per
We have a moment, this moment of dialogue. So if you agree, also times I'll ask all the questions, and you could write down what do they suggest, and then you can answer as a whole. So then so each one can take their points. Do you agree as that we could do it like this? So you take notes, because otherwise then we can answer everything. So Pasquale Lumbrano says the books in history don't highlight what Manolo has said. It prevails in them. There's a cold presentation of facts in war as something normal. So the young people, they assimilate the reality of war as the primary way in the people. So how can we remove from the thoughts of everyday human being the absurdity, how can use war for political reasons? How can we promote the thoughts of Kara Lubik to love the other country as our own? And then there's other questions also. Is also thanks to Christina. Thank you, Christina, for the summary between memory, forgiveness, reconciliation. Your experience is the gift that you have received, and that now is ours too. It is a summary of an experience of what Rodrigo had shared. And then there's a question for Rodrigo. The meeting on the dialogue in Spain, and says, Rodrigo, could you give us some examples of restorative justice where there's the intervention of the institutions?
ringraziamenti ancora
And
per
so also
Cristina.
thanks for
Ultima domanda
to
per
Christina. And then there's a question from Sylvia. I'm a daughter of Spanish Republicans who immigrated in Argentina, and a daughter of the generation in my country that experienced violence, terrorism, dictatorship.
Mi è piaciuto il titolo di una
I like the title of
sulla guerra civile spagnola, Memoria
a title that says of the civil war in Spain, Memory as the Journey of Reconciliation. Manolo, can you explain something more on this concept? When sometimes it seems that it's more simple to forget and not remember.
perché lei ha scritto in un modo tutto. Domanda per Rodrigo.
And then there's a question for Rodrigo. Rodrigo, you said that the people who feel that they are victims or people who are abused, either abuse, also
devono
the power of abuse personally or by the institution, they have to show that this abuse exists until it disappears. Sometimes, if we don't reach the point of violence, it seems like people don't listen to you. What ways are there? What experiences exist not to end in violent conflicts, to take revenge of a certain situation? And then Stefania asks, the truth has been said in one part, and conflict is not always absolute. Normally, the truth which is known is only the one of the person who wins. Then, even if you're generous with those who win, they only tell their own version. Hypothetical compensation of the people who do wrong. What can you do in this situation? That was a question. So what can you do in this situation with the hypothetical compensation? Perhaps this compensation of those who do wrong, it can be the fruit of an open confrontation of post-conflict between those who the winners but it seems like that it hasn't been this situation has never been verified. And a question for Manolo, do you see if in Spain as a war that these judicial resolutions on conflict in Catalonia? So they're very easy questions. So do you want to do it in the same order that we gave the presentation? So Manolo can start, then Rodrigo, and then Cristina, you can say what you suggest. There was also a question for Cristina from what you have left. So Manolo, over to you.
Bueno, yo creo que hay tres cuestiones que me atañen directamente, ¿no? La primera es la de los libros de historia.
I think the questions that get brought up, it's a matter of instruction, of formation, but also in the schools, the curriculum that comes is presented from the government. And you need to explain the whole story. And often the real meaning behind a war doesn't get explained. And I've lived this myself as a student and as a teacher. I've always felt the need to explain the present, to explain what's happening now. I've spoken with my students. We've spoken about the war in Iraq, in Palestine. And as a teacher, I try to have a historic perspective on the present. But if I think of immigrants, it's another situation. Or I think of colonialism, of Spain in the Sahara or in Guinea. And we can see things from a historic perspective. It's important also to talk with the students, with young people. And so this is very important. The Civil War, after the war wasn't over. an inquiry of what happened was taken ahead. And an inquiry on all the, what we call the red zone.
Lento para la traducción, gracias.
And so the people who were burnt, that was looked at, but it was the reparation was very much an ad hoc thing. It wasn't really in depth. But in fact, nothing was really done. For those who'd been injured, they didn't see. It wasn't that there was a legitimacy in the war, but there were deaths on both sides. There were deaths that were honored. Those of Franco, they were honored until democracy came. But nothing happened for those who were just buried in the common graves. So we need to have laws to understand what happened, a historic inquiry. In Spain now, there is a great effort to look into these things, to understand what really happened during the Civil War, and to understand truly what happened. But these are things that have come much later. But the law came out, the new laws came out with Zapatero in 2006, but there still isn't a political review of things. There needs to be a review of everything. But thinking of the third question, it's very concrete about Catalonia. Certainly, we've taken steps ahead also in that conflict in Catalonia. If I think of the amnesty that's been declared and the ways of forgiveness, and it's very strong in Spain, and also the decisions need to be more impartial because there are such strong biases also in the way the laws are applied, and it's linked also to nationalism. Thinking of amnesty, it takes a great effort because there isn't agreement on it, but we need to remember that there have been two historical errors on the other side. Unilateralism with the proclamation in 1934 of the state of Catalonia. That was a mistake because it was done without consideration of the federal Spanish reality. And it's what gave life then to the Civil War. So, and then there was the unilateral statement. So there's been a lot of talking, but it's a very slow process to understand also the role of the state. In Spain, it's a plurinational state. And Spain has had a great revolution. It hasn't always had this situation. Because before there was the zone of Castilla and Catalonia, that Spain has been through many different configurations. And it's important that there's an interpretation of law and justice which is very rigid to really look at history. And so there needs to be an amnesty that really can be seen and can be applied.
So it's an idea which is very complex for people who are not in Spain. This is something very interesting, but the groups of dialogue that we have in Spain, this will be very, very interesting because a dialogue is never easy, especially when it touches topics that are connected with emotions. So it's very interesting what you're explaining to us, Manolo. As a framework, as a context for the dialogues that will take place later, what will generate in people who are a part of this workshop of dialogue today. And so, Rodrigo, what would you like to say on the question? So thank you very much. Regarding the question, on the institutions,
al menos en América Latina,
at least in Latin America, there are 4 concepts that configure this new paradigm of restorative justice. And these are concepts that will enter in all the juridical aspects through deliberations in the public. And these 4 paradigms that are united are truth, justice, restoration, and the guarantee of not repeating. And I was saying, as also as a provocation, that to forgive is important because perhaps forgiveness is not something that expected of the state, to ask that people forgive, that the people who have been abused forgive, but it's in the virtue of the person, of the citizen. So this state is not to ask for forgiveness. The state can promote the conditions that there can be forgiveness, but the state in any way, it can't ask that there is forgiveness, but they need the truth. They look for the truth and justice and a restoration and the guarantee not to repeat. So as concrete examples, I would say that in Chile is something that I know. After a long dictatorship, military dictatorship of 17 years, there are concrete acts, politics. For example, the establishment in the 90s of the National Committee of Truth and Reconciliation. And so then there's a relationship that is said to get to know that in reality there were 2,000, 3,000 people who died because of the dictatorship, and that those facts are published by the first democratic president after the dictatorship, and is asked forgiveness on behalf of the state to all those who were affected, and that is a way of restoration. And there are other ways too, especially the memorials. So the inclusion of these topics within the school curriculums. And then the museums, the memory of to remember, remembrance museums, and reconciliation is incorporated in the restoration to repair economically or in some way what can be repaired, because evidently a death cannot be restored and can't repair that. And then 2010 and 2011, there was another commission, which is the Commission for politics and torture against the human rights. It's not only talking about the people who have died, but all those people who suffered because of political imprisonment or that the tortures that they have survived. So there was an effort for the state to repair all these sufferings. And it's a few years now that the president of Chile, Gabriel Boric, has established the national plan of research as it has been defined. And today, they are desaparecidos who have not been found yet. And so in many cases, we won't be able to find these desaparecidos, but the state has the obligation to go towards this research and to find all the resources possible to explain to the families what happened to their dear ones, and in the institutional way, but also in regard to the topic regarding another modality that goes beyond violence. And these commissions for truth are not accepted in a unanimous way by all of society. No, their conclusions are surrounded by conflicts, also controversies and there's a piece of society that don't accept these commissions. And so what we do in front of this, so we continue this way of going in depth, and we remain the debate alive and to give new evidence. And this is what we can do. And this is what we can do in a democratic system. And this question also touches the violence and non-violence, so how to face justice with violence or non-violence. There was a scholar who maybe some of you might know, who was saying that war is simply politics through other means. But another political theory that talks about violence, and she says that violence is not politics. Violence is outside of politics. And so I agree with what she says. Violence is not politics. And so we cannot renounce, even if it's difficult, even if there are many conflicts and controversies, we cannot go ahead with all the effort with dialogue. Thank you, Rodrigo. And so now we pass on to Cristina. I don't know if Cristina, if you want to comment. Sorry, I'm speaking to Spanish. I heard Rodrigo and I immediately spoke in Spanish. I'm so sorry. Sorry, everyone. And sorry to, so Cristina, what does this bring inside of you? What would you like to say was for the question?
Could you, what was the specific question? That was,
so there was, so saying thank you for the summary between forgiveness, reconciliation. This experience is a gift that you have received, and now it's ours. Thank you. And they said other things, but if you would like to say something about this, and then otherwise I will look for the other question.
Va bene così.
that's fine.
Ma io credo che la memoria è
I think memory is very important
perché, come restituisce qualcosa a chi è stato tolto.
because you restore something that's been taken, because people continue to live in memories for what they've built, and maybe they've never managed to draw these things to a conclusion. So there can be very important moments, and that maybe the process gets interrupted, and their teachings can then be useful to everyone else, also to us today. So memory in this sense, the collectivity can take things to a conclusion that maybe in a cruel way were interrupted. Also, memory is important so as not to forget, to verify things that were just or that maybe weren't so just. Something that struck me is that truth is with the winners. If the truth is with the winners, then we need to have clear in people. Otherwise, we need to build up in people this awareness, because also recently, I think it's something that's been forgotten, that there are some things are right that have a priority, and other things that maybe aren't so right, but they've taken a wrong direction. But beyond everything, there needs to be a collective effort so as to face these things. And to face these things, we've got to disarm our words, our thoughts, and our heart needs to be free. And this isn't something that comes spontaneously. That it's something, maybe it's part of your education. But maybe on your own you can't manage it, but together you can. Because I've seen that the others, that on the example of the others, this helped me.
Non proprio liberi dall'aggressività sono stati
Maybe
modulati e
these were
sono
people and
diventati più pacifici. Ecco.
they
E poi,
weren't like that, but they
questo
became more
momento è
peaceful
stato per
people
me, è
with
stato anche
time.
un momento di
And for
grazia.
me, that was a moment of
Questo,
grace.
e per questo sento anche di
And
dover dire che la
that's why
grazia
I
esiste.
think I've got to say
Altre
grace
volte
exists.
che non ho vissuto
Other
questa
times,
esperienza è
I
stato
didn't live
davvero
this
un viaggio
experience.
divino, una conquista,
It's a
perché
great journey. It was a
ero
conquest
morosa dentro perché sentivo degli
because you're
elementi
stuck inside
di
it.
non pace che non
And
riuscivo
I
a
didn't feel
raggiungere.
peace, that I couldn't find
Forse mi
peace.
aspettavo, ecco.
Maybe I was
Però
expecting
avrò
to,
dovuto percorrere strade
but
di avvicinamento.
we had to follow paths that drew us closer together.
Grazie Cristina, Rodrigo.
Thank you, Cristina, Rodrigo, Manolo, for what you have said. And Cristina, I'm just going to take your words to make a short conclusion, because you really said things that I would really like to reinforce. Because Rodrigo before was saying that sometimes the person who's been affected is honorable and has to be respected, and maybe the offender has not doesn't feel. So forgiveness is a conquest. So it's not automatic. It's not a must. We have to ask forgiveness, but it's not always. But when Christina speaks about a grace, one can also say, because she was speaking about the logic of the gospel, one could ask oneself, but how can one do this if you don't have the logic of the gospel? But she explains that what arrives if a person is trained with a free soul and to disarm the words and thoughts. And she also says that this conquest, you can do it together. Together, it can be done. And it's really beautiful. And it's a summary that can generate a lot of dialogue later on, each one with their topic. So I thank you all very much, Cristina, Rodrigo, Manolo, and also all the people who translated, because they had to run a bit. And now I pass on to Mariangels and Ferdinando to conclude this. So
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who've been connected, but especially those who've given their time to give these beautiful talks and also this deep dialogue. We want to continue the dialogue. If maybe you're together in little groups, to continue in these groups, then afterwards maybe we can come together on internet also, because I think this is something that really stimulates us. So this is where you can find us, at the Centro Dialogo at focolare.org, and we also have a website, Dialogue for Unity. And also, we'd be very happy if any of you have the possibility of giving us any economic help to support this initiative. If you click on the donate button on the post you receive, you can give a donation. And we want to tell you that in October and November, we're hoping to have another meeting like this. And the idea is that we would like to invite Jesus Moran, the co-president of the Focolare, with other people, but we'll keep you informed about the progress of this. So thank you for this moment. And we'll meet again soon.
If the Zoom remains for another few minutes, so if there are groups who could write in the chat where they connected, the groups where they have met together, so just to enrich the participation and just to know that. So thank you very much to everyone.
Grazie.
We go in depth.